The desert wind swept across the flat, stony plain, whispering through the silence like a ghost too tired to haunt. Beyond, the mountains dusted in early snow, under a sky that threatened rain or maybe memory. 3 young horses stood alone. They were different. Small, quiet, overlooked. One was a pale silver with icy blue eyes and a faint limp. They called him Starlance. Another, a coal-gray colt with piercing eyes, skittish and silent, Grimwhisper. The third was deep chestnut, almost black under shadow, with a strange stillness in his stance, Nightforged. People at the Hollowthorn ranch said they were useless. Too weak, too strange, too slow to train. "They're a waste of feed," muttered the hands. But that morning, as clouds rolled heavy above the distant ridge, a man stepped down from an old red pickup and changed everything. Rhevan Hollowthorn wasn't a man people noticed anymore. His grizzled beard and worn leather coat told of long winters and longer losses. Once a respected trainer, he hadn't touched a horse in years, not since the fire that took his barn, his pride, and something deeper. He saw the 3 colts from across the pasture. Alone. Unwanted. Something inside him stirred, a pain or a memory, he couldn't tell. Without a word, Rhevan stepped into the open, walked slow toward them, and dropped to one knee on the cold, cracked earth. His eyes locked with theirs. No fear. No commands. Just a silence that understood silence. Starlance stepped forward first. Then Grimwhisper. Nightforged hung back, always the watcher. Rhevan extended a weathered hand, palm open. When that cold muzzle touched his skin, something shifted in the air. Behind him, the ranch workers laughed. Old Hollowthorns finally lost it. "Let them laugh," Rhevan whispered. "You're not broken, just unseen." That afternoon, he made an offer. The owner didn't hesitate. "Take him. They're no good to us." By sunset, the colts were in his trailer, bound for his quiet stretch of land nestled beyond Ember Ridge. There, where no one would rush them, no one would shout, Rhevan would give them something they'd never had, time and a second chance. But as he drove through the canyon pass, he didn't notice the black SUV parked behind the bend. Inside sat Dorian Frostgrave, staring through binoculars, eyes narrowed. "They found them," he muttered into his earpiece. A voice crackled on the other end. Female, sharp. "Tamsin Emberwraith." "Then we're already too late." No one knew the truth behind those horses. Not even Rhevan. But the moment he knelt beside them, it began. And it would change everything. The drive back to Rhevan's land was long and quiet. The gravel roads twisted like memories he hadn't touched in years. In the trailer behind him, the colts shuffled nervously. Every now and then, he caught a glimpse of them in the side mirror. Eyes wide, ears twitching, unsure of what was happening, but strangely calm. His ranch sat at the edge of nowhere, just past Ember Ridge, where the land dipped low and the wind carried voices that only the old seemed to hear. The house was modest, cracked wood siding, a porch that had seen better days, but it was home. More importantly, it was safe. He opened the trailer door gently and stepped back. One by one, they came out. Starlance blinked in the amber light. Grimwhisper snorted and pawed at the dirt. Nightforged didn't move right away, his gaze fixed somewhere far off, like he was remembering a place that didn't exist anymore. Rhevan led them into the paddock and left the gate open. He didn't believe in locking in something that had already known too much confinement. He watched them explore the space, sniffing the edges, their steps uncertain but growing stronger with each pass. As the wind picked up and rattled the trees, he felt it again, that strange weight in his chest. Not pain. Not joy. Something else. Something like purpose. He spent that night in the barn with them. Didn't even bother going inside. Built a small fire just outside the stall doors and sat with his back against a wooden beam, coat pulled tight around him. He told them stories. Not that they understood the words, but maybe they felt the rhythm. Stories about his wife, about the fire, about how he'd once trained horses that went on to win medals, and how none of it mattered now. He didn't expect answers. He just needed to speak. But far away, on the edge of the highway, Tamsin Emberwraith stood outside the black SUV, arms crossed. Dorian leaned against the hood, scanning the desert with a military-grade scope. "He doesn't know what he has," Dorian said, voice low. "He will," Tamsin replied, her eyes cold. "And when he does, they won't be his anymore." The wind shifted again, kicking up dust across the plains. In the paddock, Nightforged suddenly raised his head and stared into the distance. Something in his posture changed, alert, rigid. Grimwhisper followed suit. Even Starlance stopped chewing hay and looked toward the horizon. Rhevan noticed. He stood slowly, brushing dirt from his coat. Something was coming, and it had just begun. The next morning brought a heavy stillness to the land. Not just quiet, watchful. Rhevan woke before dawn, his back stiff from sleeping on barn straw, but his mind sharp. The colts were already up. They moved with more energy than before, but something about their eyes unsettled him. Nightforged especially. He kept glancing toward the ridge, as if expecting something, or someone, to appear from the horizon. Rhevan brushed them gently, one by one, using the old grooming kit that had belonged to his wife, Mirella Ashwinter. Her initials were still carved into the handle of the soft bristle brush. Every stroke brought a flicker of her memory. Her laughter in the wind, her hands in his, the way she used to whisper to the horses like they were made of glass. She would have seen it too, the way these colts were different. Not just in spirit, but in presence. They didn't move like broken animals. They moved like survivors. Later that day, Rhevan drove to the supply store in town. He hadn't been there in months. As he stepped through the door, heads turned. Some nodded politely. Others whispered. "He's training again?" one said. "Must have lost what's left of his mind." Rhevan ignored them all. He wasn't there to be seen, just to get what he needed. But as he loaded sacks of feed into the truck, he noticed a figure across the parking lot. Lean, dark coat, hands in his pockets. Corvin Blackhallow, former stable hand. Fired years ago for reasons Rhevan never fully understood. Their eyes met, only for a second, but that second stretched like barbed wire between them. Corvin smiled, slow and bitter, and then turned away without a word. Rhevan's stomach tightened. Something was off. By the time he returned to the ranch, the sky was turning iron gray. A storm was building. He checked the colts. They were fine. Restless, but fine. Yet as he walked back toward the house, something on the barn wall stopped him cold. A symbol, carved in fresh lines. Sharp, deliberate. The same mark that had been found burned into the gate the night Mirella died. Rhevan froze, heart pounding. He turned toward the ridge just as a gust of wind howled through the canyon, and for a split second he thought he saw movement. A figure, watching. He stepped back inside the barn, eyes never leaving the door. He had brought the colts here to protect them from the world. But maybe it was the world that needed protection from them. That night, Rhevan didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the porch with a rifle across his lap, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. The symbol carved into the barn still echoed in his mind. It wasn't just vandalism. It was a message, one written in a language only a few still remembered. And Rhevan? He had spent years trying to forget it. Inside the paddock, the colts were restless. Starlance paced the fence, ears flicking at every sound. Grimwhisper stood rigid in the shadows, alert. Nightforged didn't move, but his eyes, they were wide open, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Rhevan watched them and couldn't help the question forming in the back of his mind. What are you really? In the early morning haze, Rhevan pulled out an old photo album. He hadn't opened it in years. Dust clung to the cover like old grief. Flipping through, he found a picture from decades ago, him and Morella at a breeding event in Wyoming. In the background was a stallion with eyes just like Nightforged's. Back then, it had been dismissed as a fluke of nature. But Morella had said something strange that day. "There's a story in his blood, Rev. I just can't read it yet." Rhevan closed the book slowly. By midday, the wind picked up again. Not natural wind, but that eerie low howl that seemed to spiral from the earth itself. The sky darkened even though there were no clouds. And then the power went out. No lights. No hum of the barn generator. Silence. That's when the visitors arrived. A black SUV rolled up the dirt road, kicking dust into the air like smoke. Rhevan stepped out with one hand on his belt. The doors opened, and out came Tamsin Emberwraith and Dorian Frostgrave, dressed in sharp black, faces unreadable. "You're keeping something that doesn't belong to you," Tamsin said calmly. Rhevan narrowed his eyes. "They were abandoned." "They were hidden," Dorian corrected. "For good reason." Rhevan's pulse quickened. "You know what that mark means." Tamsin nodded once. "We carved it." Before Rhevan could respond, a low rumble shook the ground. Not thunder, footsteps. Heavy, rhythmic, coming from beyond the ridge. The colts snapped their heads in unison toward the noise. And then, Nightforged let out a cry that split the air like a blade. It wasn't the sound of a horse. It was a warning. The cry that tore from Nightforged's throat was ancient, too raw, too intelligent. Rhevan staggered back instinctively, as if the sound had reached inside his chest and pulled something loose. Even Tamsin and Dorian paused, their trained composure flickering for a breath. The dust in the paddock rose in swirling columns. Somewhere beneath the ranch, the ground trembled. Nightforged stood in the center of the paddock now, head raised high, muscles tense, eyes locked on the horizon. Grimwhisper circled him protectively, while Starlance pressed against the fence, trembling, not from fear, but anticipation. Rhevan had trained war horses. He had seen stallions charge into chaos. But never this. "I told you," Dorian muttered to Tamsin, watching the scene unfold like a soldier watching the beginning of a battle he didn't want to fight. "They're waking up." Rhevan turned sharply. "Waking up? From what?" Tamsin hesitated. For the first time since arriving, there was doubt in her voice. "From what was buried, in them and in you." The words struck deeper than he expected. Rhevan looked at the colts again, really looked. The scars on Nightforged's legs weren't from accidents. They were symmetrical, ritualistic. Starlance's eyes shimmered with a strange inner light. And Grimwhisper. His hooves left no sound in the dirt even as he moved. Rhevan backed away from the paddock, confusion and disbelief battling in his chest. "You think they're... what, weapons?" "No," Dorian said. "Not weapons. Warnings." Suddenly, a loud crack split the air. From the ridge, rocks tumbled down in clouds of red dust. And then, stepping through the haze, came figures, cloaked in desert robes, faces hidden. Silent, deliberate, and walking in formation. Tamsin's hand went to her hip. "Don't," Rhevan warned. "This land's older than your orders." The figures stopped just short of the property line. One of them raised a hand, not in threat, but reverence, pointing toward the paddock. Nightforged stepped forward, and the ground stilled. Everyone, Rhevan, Tamsin, Dorian, even the strangers, watched in silence. Nightforged lowered his head to the earth. A pulse traveled through the soil like a heartbeat, reaching out in every direction. Trees bent. Wind stopped. Birds vanished from the sky. And just like that, Rhevan realized something horrifying. These weren't just horses with a strange past. They were survivors of something the world had tried to forget. And now, whatever they were running from, had found them again. The silence after the pulse was suffocating. Not even the wind dared move. The strangers at the ridge stood motionless, their faces hidden beneath their veils, their presence heavy with something Rhevan couldn't name. Not hostility, but something older. Recognition. Nightforged remained at the edge of the paddock, gaze locked with the cloaked figure at the front of the group. It was like watching two ghosts see each other again after lifetimes apart. Tamsin stepped forward slowly, hand still on her sidearm. They're not supposed to respond like this. The bloodlines were dormant. Her voice cracked at the end, the first sign that even she didn't fully understand what they were dealing with. Dorian didn't speak. He only watched, hand on his earpiece, waiting for instructions that never came. Rhevan moved to Nightforged's side, but didn't touch him. He didn't have to. Something in him, instinct or memory, he wasn't sure, told him this wasn't about control. It was about connection. "Who are they?" he asked the air, more than anyone present. But the answer came from behind him. "They were called the Hollowthorn once," said a voice. Deep, dry like gravel. Corvin Blackhallow had appeared on the path, leaning on a cane that looked older than the house itself. Bound to the land. Bred not for labor, but for balance. Until balance was broken. Rhevan's heart thudded. "You knew?" Corvin's eyes met his. "We all did. Some of us just chose to forget." A sharp breeze cut through the stillness, and with it came a low hum, not mechanical, but organic, vibrating through bone and memory. The colts lifted their heads in unison. Then, without warning, Grimwhisper leapt the paddock fence. No hesitation. Just grace and purpose. He landed soundlessly between Rhevan and the cloaked strangers. And then he knelt. Not in submission. In acknowledgement. The lead stranger stepped forward. Removed their hood. It was Mirella. Or someone who looked so much like her. Rhevan staggered back, breath gone from his lungs. Her face was older, etched with time and dust, but the eyes, those were hers. She looked at him not with surprise, but sorrow. "You were never meant to carry this alone," she whispered. Before Rhevan could speak, the earth groaned, deep, wounded. From the canyon, a low roar began to rise. Something had awakened beneath them. And it was no longer sleeping. The roar rising from the canyon wasn't just sound, it was memory, pulled from the deep marrow of the land. It shook through Rhevan's chest like a second heartbeat, ancient and enraged. Dust erupted from fissures along the ridge. The Hollowthorn colts stood alert, their bodies humming with some invisible force, as if every cell in them had been waiting for this precise moment. Mirella, or the woman who wore her face, stepped toward Rhevan. "You buried me," she said gently, "but not all of me stayed buried." Her voice was calm, but her eyes trembled with grief. Rhevan's mind spun, torn between recognition and disbelief. "You died," he muttered, as if saying it aloud might make it true again. "I held your hand. I scattered your ashes." Mirella nodded. "You did. But there are ashes that don't burn. Parts of us the fire can't reach." Tamsin, eyes wide, stepped back. "This wasn't in any of the archives," she whispered to Dorian, who remained frozen, hand hovering near his weapon. "You read the same reports I did," he said. "Project Hollowthorn failed. We destroyed every trace." Mirella turned her gaze to them. "You didn't destroy it. You planted it, and now it's grown roots too deep to cut." Suddenly, the earth cracked open in the center of the canyon. From within it, a column of light shot skyward. Not fire, not lightning, but something older. A tower of memories made solid. And at its base, shapes began to rise. Not human. Not entirely beast. Half-formed things, echoes of past mistakes, twisted by science and buried by guilt. Dorian drew his sidearm. "Don't," Rhevan snapped. "If you shoot at what you don't understand, you'll start a war you can't end." Nightforged stepped beside him. The colt's body shimmered faintly, a ripple just under the skin, like heat rising off asphalt. Starlance and Grimwhisper flanked him, forming a protective line. And then, for the first time, all three of them moved toward the canyon. Not to flee, to face whatever was rising. Mirella's voice followed them. They were created to protect the balance. But if balance is lost long enough, even protectors forget who they are. The wind shifted. Far below, the things crawling from the earth opened their mouths, but made no sound. Instead, the silence pressed into Rhevan's ears like thunder. This was not the final battle. It was the remembering before the reckoning. The hollow-born colts stood at the edge of the canyon, the wind tugging at their manes like a warning. Below them, the shapes continued to rise, tall, distorted, like creatures caught between evolution and abandonment. Their forms weren't fully solid, shifting in the light as if stitched from shadow and ash. Rhevan couldn't look away. He wasn't sure if he was watching a threat or a memory demanding justice. Behind him, Tamsin adjusted her earpiece, whispering coded commands to someone far away. Government, maybe military, or something older, hidden under the same stone that buried the hollow-born truth. Dorian's face was pale. "This was never about horses," he muttered. "It was about what we tried to rewrite in the blood." Mirella, arms crossed over her chest, turned to them both. "You weaponized purity," she said, voice calm but razor-sharp. "And when it broke, you labeled it a failure instead of asking what it was protecting you from." The light from the canyon dimmed for a moment, like breath being held. Then, from the shadow, one of the figures stepped fully into view. It was massive, its face stretched and wrong, part man, part beast. But its eyes were familiar. Rhevan gasped. "That was one of ours," he whispered. "That was Ashthorn, the lead from Hollowborn Series 3. Mirella nodded. "They didn't die in the collapse. They changed. Because they had to." She looked down the ridge with something between sorrow and pride. "Because you weren't ready." Nightforged neighed, short, sharp, and the three colts began to descend the slope. They moved with purpose, unafraid, as if pulled by a memory deeper than bone. Rhevan started after them, but Mirella raised a hand. "They have to face this first. Without you. Without any of us." Rhevan clenched his jaw. "They're just colts." Mirella met his gaze. "They were never just anything." As the colts reached the base of the canyon, the figures circled them, yet didn't attack. Instead, the creatures bowed, low, reverent. Dust spiraled upward in unnatural patterns. A ripple of heat passed through the air. Then, with a single exhale from Nightforged, the canyon floor pulsed, a wave of memory, recognition, and release. One of the beasts disintegrated into ash, peacefully, as if released from a long torment. Tamsin backed away, stunned. "They're not fighting. They're healing them." And that terrified her more than war. Because it meant something was coming that wanted them whole again. The canyon had gone silent again, but not empty. The creatures, once mangled products of failed experiments and forgotten war, now stood still, their monstrous forms slowly unraveling in threads of ash, memory, and light. Each one that faded left behind not fear, but peace. It wasn't death, it was closure. And the hollow-born colts were at the center of it, guiding the process like ancient spirits returned to finish what others could not. Rhevan watched from the ridge, heart pounding. He had trained horses all his life, but this wasn't training. This was destiny playing out in the open. "They were made for this," he whispered, more to himself than anyone. Mirella stood beside him, hands clasped, tears tracking silently down her weathered face. "They remember everything their bloodlines have been through," she said softly. "The experiments. the losses, the betrayals. And they carry it, not with hatred, but purpose. Dorian and Tamsin were no longer giving orders. Tamsin had disconnected her earpiece hours ago. The agency hadn't called back, or perhaps they had seen enough and chose silence over accountability. Dorian sat on the back of the SUV, head in his hands, the weight of his involvement finally crashing down. "We thought we were saving humanity," he murmured. "But we were just hiding from the truth." Rhevan didn't respond. He knew there were no words strong enough for a mistake this old. Nightforged looked up toward the ridge, straight at Rhevan. For a second, man and colt locked eyes, and in that gaze, Rhevan felt something shift deep in his chest. Not guilt, not fear. Permission. Like the colt was saying, "You've done your part. Now let us do ours." A warm wind blew through the canyon, stirring dust and memories alike. All three Hollowthorn began to glow faintly, veins of golden light pulsing beneath their coats, connecting them like threads in a single design. Then the earth trembled again, subtly at first, then with more force. The canyon cracked further. But this wasn't like before. This wasn't destruction. It was opening. From deep within, a structure rose slowly, metallic, covered in ancient writing and humming with dormant energy. A vault. Long buried. Long sealed. Mirella stepped forward. "That's where they locked the original Hollowthorn archive," she said. "The truth. The first generation. Their memories, their pain, their blueprints." Rhevan felt his throat tighten. "And if it's opening now?" "It means they're ready," Mirella said, "to show the world what was done to them." As the structure opened with a soft hiss, light spilled out. And with it, something began to awaken inside Rhevan. Something he hadn't felt in decades. Hope. The vault doors opened with a slow exhale, as if the canyon itself had been holding its breath for generations. Inside, a light glowed that was not electric, soft, warm, and alive. Rhevan stepped forward, heart pounding, with Mirella at his side. The Hollowthorn colt stood at the entrance, as if guarding not treasure, but truth. Starlance bowed his head. Nightforged remained still. Grimwhisper watched the shadows as if waiting for the past to speak. The air inside was thick with memory. Along the metallic walls were rows of crystalline vessels, each pulsing gently with color. Mirella touched one. It flickered to life, projecting images into the air. Not data. Not numbers. Moments. The first Hollowthorn, created to protect the Earth's balance from mankind's worst impulses. Gentle, intelligent, bonded to humans, until they were twisted by fear, control, and war. Rhevan watched faces he didn't recognize. Handlers, scientists, riders, all gone now. All complicit, including, perhaps, himself. One image stopped him cold. A young man, him years ago, with a foal that looked just like Nightforged. He had no memory of it, but the foal did. That's why Nightforged had trusted him. Not because he was new, but because he had come back. A second chance, written in silence. Rhevan's knees buckled as emotion rose like a wave. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't remember." Mirella took his hand. "But they did. And they still chose you." Outside, the remaining creatures faded into the canyon dust, released from their torment. The balance had not been restored through force, but through recognition. The Hollowthorn had come not to fight a war, but to end one. Not with blood, but with truth. Tamsin approached slowly. "The agency will come," she said. "They'll want to bury this again." Rhevan turned to her, calmer than ever. "Then they'll have to bury all of us with it." Dorian stepped beside her. "Or we help them remember. The whole world. The real story." As the sun began to rise behind the ridge, casting long golden light across the land, The three colts walked side by side up toward the ranch. Their movements were calm now. Purpose fulfilled. Past accepted. They were no longer symbols of failure or forgotten experiments. They were the bridge between what was lost and what could be rebuilt. And as Rhevan watched them disappear over the hill, he felt it again, the thing he thought he had buried with Mirella. Not regret, but legacy.